So after Spyro, there was Girl with a Stick, which you've spoken about before. Was it just it didn't click? Was this the? I remember in the Full Moon show you were talking about it just didn't feel like it was. Was it coming together? Did you ever sort of really identify what it was, or was it just one of those things?
There were a couple of problems with Girl with a Stick. First, we never figured out the one thing that the game was going to do better than any other game. It was more that we had this idea of creating a more mature game, moving away from Spyro so we wouldn't get pigeonholed as that company that just does platformers. And we took a half step in that more mature direction. We didn't get all the way there, and so we ended up with a concept that gameplay-wise and art-wise was in this weird sort of no man's land between Spyro and something else. And it was unclear who our audience was. But what really killed the game was the fact that we hadn't been able to prototype gameplay. We had a lot of ideas for story, for backgrounds, and we built them, and we built characters, and we animated them, but getting gameplay up and running was challenging as we were developing our new PlayStation 2 engine. So when it came time to deliver a game that was fun during our first playable, we couldn't because we hadn't iterated on combat enough. It just wasn't fun to kill enemies. It wasn't fun to run around. It wasn't fun to ride beasts, which was one of the aspects of the game. And we had to admit that it just wasn't working. I had to admit that it wasn't working.
So what's it like to make that call? Because when you spoke about it before, it was described as being sort of a release and sort of it was uplifting to kind of put it all behind you. But when you actually decide, okay, we've got to kill this, what's that like to make as a decision?
Well, first I felt that I had failed everybody because I've been the one pushing this concept for a long time, and I tried really hard to keep people excited about it, figure out ways to keep our publisher excited about it. And I think in the back of my mind, I knew all along that we were going to have real trouble with this. And the rest of the company was not excited. No matter what I said, no matter how clearly I tried to paint the vision for the future, people weren't buying into it.
Yeah.
And I was reluctant to make that admission that it just wasn't going to work, because that was my first, I'd say, significant failure in the games in any business. And but stepping over that threshold and saying, okay, didn't work, I screwed up, sorry guys, was a relief, because it meant that we were free to try something new, to do something better, and learn from those mistakes that we had made on Girl with the Stick.
What do you think you learned? What was the sort of one of the key things you took away? Like, that's what I need to look out for and not do again.
A lot of things. I think I learned that at the time, I think we all acknowledged that we needed to play to our strengths better. And our strength at the time was in platformers. So instead of trying something completely different, maybe we should take what we know well and iterate on that and take platformers in a different direction, which is what we ultimately did with Ratchet.
Yeah.
But also looking back, I think that, going back to what Brian was doing with Spyro, when he was doing the camera controls and making him really fun to play, we missed that on Girl with the Stick. And Brian, again, stepped in with Ratchet and did exactly the same thing. And from the very beginning, Brian focused on making Ratchet just fun. Fun to run around, fun to make him jump and do flips. And that was an epiphany, a second epiphany for all of us, where we realized, hey, fun has got to come first in these games.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the PS2 engine. Before we talk about Ratchet and Clank, what was the one thing you remember moving from PS1 to PS2 in terms of we can do this now, or we have to do this differently, or this technology? What was the change that you noticed most?
Well, back then it was about the number of polygons you could display on screen. That was all the talk, and what was cool is we could make much more complex models. I remember the comparison. Spyro the Dragon Ratchet as a character had more polygons than any of our Spyro levels on their own. That was the big comparison we made, and it was a real eye-opener for most of us, because that was a stark demonstration of the leap in processing power that the PlayStation 2 had over the PlayStation 1.
So is that then does that open you up and go, wow, we can do all this stuff? Or do you kind of go, oh God, we've got to do all this stuff?
No, at the time we were thinking, wow, we can do all this stuff.
Right.
We weren't thinking about the consequences of growing the team and the additional complexity that comes in when building a much bigger game.
Yeah. Not that long ago, you released pictures of sort of the evolution of Ratchet, the lizard character with the gauntlet, and a much more kind of elongated kind of Clank. Obviously the core sort of thing was there before it was shaped. What was the original idea, and what changed it into what eventually became, the game we know.
Well, again, bringing up Brian Hastings again, he was the one who suggested the kernel of the idea for Ratchet and Clank, and it was, let's do a game about a little a creature who flies from planet to planet with cool weapons. And his inspiration was Marvin the Martian from the Warner Brothers cartoons. I think it's Warner Brothers, or Looney Tunes. And Dave Girton, who's our lead character artist, began drawing versions of that little lizard creature, and that is reminiscent of Marvin the Martian.
Yeah.
But then we collectively decided we got to make him a little bit more anthropomorphic, something that people can identify with, something that'll have something where we can make a face more expressive, and we went down this route of a furry creature with ears and ultimately stripes. So, and I remember we had a lot of debates over what he was, and so we made up this name, Lombax, instead of, and we got a lot of questions early on about, is he a fox, is he a cat, what the hell is he? And we just said, no, he's a Lombax.
Was there any sort of derivation to that, or any kind of origin? Was it just like the sound of the word? That's what he is.
I can't remember who came up with that word, but that's just what we decided to call him.
Okay, and you've made, is it 9 Ratchet and Clank games?
Yeah, we're about to release our 9th.
Yeah, so why have you stuck with him so long? So obviously you moved on from Spyro, you moved on from Resistance, but you always sort of stay with him. Are you attached to him, or is he profitable? Is it?
Yeah.
Why do you stay with him?
Oh, well, one of the great things about Ratchet, the universe, is that it's infinitely extendable, and we never put constraints on what we could do with Ratchet. He's in a completely made-up universe. There are no restrictions for us in terms of what kind of characters we can create, because anything goes in a Ratchet universe. That we never try to define it so strictly that we would limit ourselves, and so we just keep trying new stuff.
Okay. So there's been a running thread through the games about weaponry and guns. I noticed with Disruptor there's a few guns in there that look like they could have been in Ratchet, look like they could have been in Resistance.
Yeah.
Do you think guns, that's your thing? Is it something you're trying to perfect, or you just enjoy making them?
I can only speak for myself on this one. I love making the weapons in our games. I love being involved in that process and working with others here to try to identify that fun factor and get to that point where you can hold a weapon, you can equip it and use it, and all of a sudden you've hit that point. Yes, that is fun. I could use this weapon over and over again and still derive the same satisfaction. That's hard to get to. It takes a lot of iteration, but for a lot of us here, it's the ultimate satisfaction to reach that point.
Do you think with Ratchet or Resistance there have been a gun where you look at it and go, that's as good as I'm ever going to do, that's the best gun?
I felt that way about the Bouncer for a while in Ratchet, and I still think it's a great gun. But I know there are a million ideas out there for weapons and how we can take them, and we believe that we can continue to take weapons in different directions.